Good evening, students. I'm audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Today we have Shodhan Babu. Mr. Shodhan Babu was my classmate in Symbiosis Law School. Now he has established a law firm along with Sherbir Panak. Sherbir Panak is none other than famous actress Gul Panak's brother. So now Shodhan and Sherbir Panak both have offices in Bangalore and also in Delhi. They had various civil and criminal disputes matters. They practice in multiple forums such as Supreme Court of India, Karnataka High Court, civil trial courts across Karnataka, Consumer Forum Commission, Karnataka Lokayukta, Karnataka Electricity Regulatory Commission, Appellate Tribunal for Electricity, Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, Karnataka State Administrative Tribunal, Karnataka Appellate Tribunal, and the Competition Appellate Tribunal. So today we will be discussing mainly with regard to Karnataka Electricity Act, Electricity Act 2003. What is the scope of practice area in this area of electricity? Today we'll try to understand how Shodhan will help us understand this subject. So it's one interesting area of practice. Many of our legal fraternity also are not aware about. So let's understand, and in future also Mr. Shodhan has worked in various other appellate tribunals. We'll also try to understand in several other seminars also how different tribunals and appellate commissions work for different types of grievances. So I hand over the stage to Mr. Shodhan. Shodhan, we welcome you. Now the stage is yours. Shodhan, we can start the seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abhilash. Thank you for this invitation and giving me an opportunity to address your students. Hi everyone. I'm sorry we couldn't be doing this face to face. That would have been much better. But we'll try and make the most of the situation. Today we are going to try and understand the Electricity Act 2003. So please feel free to use the raise hand option in case you have any questions. Please feel free to interrupt the presentation if there are any questions. I think it's better that those are addressed immediately and before you let me go on further. So I'll share a short presentation and we'll just go through the structured presentation. I think that would be convenient for everyone. Just give me a moment, please. Okay, is this on the screen? Can everyone see it? Goals that we will look to sort of achieve, and this is the ground that we will look to cover. We will look to understand the application of the Electricity Act 2003 from power. When the generators actually generate the electricity that we end up consuming in the end as consumers. So we will look at how the regulatory system applies to transmission, distribution, and supply to the end consumers. And then we'll also look at the tariff structures, both for generators who generate the power and sell it to state entities, who in turn supply to us, the consumers, and what we ultimately end up paying as our electricity bill, to whichever entity that we pay to. Whether if you're in Bangalore, in the Bangalore region, we would pay to Bescom. If you're in the region, you would pay to CESC. If you're in Mangalore, you would pay to MESCOM. So what are all these different entities and how do they sort of function together, right? So that's what we'll be looking to get into. We'll also get into tariff structure for generators and consumers and look into the economics of it, how it works for generators and how it works for the consumers. And whatever that put are distribution licensees. And distribution licensees are nothing but Bescom, MESCOM, CESC, GESCOM, HESCOM. These are the entities which distribute the power that's generated to the end consumers in Karnataka. Look at the structure and hierarchy of the regulators and their powers and functions. So there are some regulators in the both at a state and a central level, which do the role of regulating, passing regulations, rules, applying them, enforcing them, deciding disputes between the different stakeholders. So we'll also look at them. So we'll get a comprehensive idea of what it is like to practice in this area of law. So like I said, we're looking at the Electricity Act 2003. 2003 is fairly, it's very recent. Of course, we've had electricity for quite a while. So what was the position pre-2003? The Indian Electricity 1910, the electricity differences pre-2003 and the earlier position. So the 2003 Act is what we call a consolidated legislation. What this simply means is 3 acts were merged into one, and it was consolidated. So the major changes brought in by the 2003 regime was delicensing. Remember, at one point of time when we were younger, there was something called the KEB, the Karnataka Electricity Board. Now, pre-2003, the KEB did everything. They did generation, they did distribution, they were responsible for everything. So what this led to was a shortage in the extent of electricity available in the country, because every state had its own system, similar to the KEB in Karnataka. And generation was could only be undertaken by the state, and it was therefore limited by private participation. Now, suddenly, anybody could set up a power plant, generate electricity, and sell it to the state, or sell it to third parties. For example, I could set up a power plant and sell it to one of you. That was allowed. And another thing that was allowed is what we call captive generation. Now, captive generation, what it simply means is I can set up a power plant and supply the power to myself. So this would result in me being off the grid. I would not be given an invoice from, say, Bescom. I have a separate agreement with whoever is generating electricity for me, and I would pay them a tariff that is privately negotiated between the parties. And more often than not, because the state wanted to promote this, is cheaper than Bescom electricity, right? Or electricity supplied by any distribution licensees. Now, this primarily makes sense for businesses and factories and all of them, and we'll come to how that operates. So the infrastructure required for transmitting, distributing of electricity generated. So some basic principles: electricity is not a commodity that can be stored. Batteries, something that can be stored. And so far, it's not been feasible to have batteries storing electricity for supply of electricity, even to, say, houses, right? So you can't generate a lot of renewable energy power, for example, store it in batteries and use it over us. So far, commercially, that you have is, let's say I set up a plant in Gulbarga and I'm supplying to some mall in Bangalore, which is possible. I set up the plant, I generate, and to carry that electricity from the point of generation to, notionally the mall in Bangalore, wherever that is, distribution of electricity, transmission and distribution of electricity. Once a transmission of electricity have its infrastructure on the highways, when you're using the highway, so you pay. Very similarly, you're using the power lines right next to these highways more often than not, and you pay a certain charge. Certain jurisdiction, let's say it comes to Bangalore, Bescom's jurisdiction. Now, within Bangalore, Bescom will use its access to this network, right? It's like saying access to a road to travel part of the state to state is called wheeling. Now, it's activity, but it permitted power trading. So, for example, if there's excess generation and they wanted to purchase power in the for example, you could purchase power.
Okay.
Right? So power trading was also something that was permitted by the Electricity Act of 2003. So you see this host of measures introduced to involve the private sector. Now anybody could generate. Now people could start trading in electricity. There was a private open market for electricity, and all of this was done to ensure that generation goes up. And because of all these measures that were taken in 2003, India is actually a power surplus state at the moment. We generate more electricity than we need. And yes, distribution is still a problem. So not every village may have access to electricity, though, the central government has declared that we are 100% electrified, but there are some issues here and there. And we'll come to why that is when we look at what the DISCOMs do and the tariff structure. So the next point in all of this is that state governments were also permitted to unbundle state electricity boards. Now, like I said, Karnataka had the Karnataka Electricity Board. that was doing both generation and distribution and transmission, and it was involved in everything. Now, after this act came into force, that had to be unbundled. Generation could no longer be done only by the board. We had a lot of private operators involved in generation. So the state had to set up the Karnataka Power Transmission Corporation Limited as a separate entity. The distribution licensees, what we discussed, BESCOM, MESCOM, CESC, etc., as separate entities with separate functions. So KPTCL was put solely for transmission. The discoms were put solely for distribution and supply to end consumers. And generation was completely hived off. So now anyone could generate. So in Karnataka, we have the Karnataka Power Corporation Limited, which also does generation of electricity. And we also have a lot of private players involved in generation. The Act also introduced the state and central regulatory commission. So every state now has something called a State Electricity Regulatory Commission. In Karnataka, that would be the Karnataka Electricity Regulatory Commission. We'll come to the functions and how these bodies function and what is their hierarchy and all of that later in the presentation. But this list is just to sort of cover everything that we will be going through in the course of this presentation and to give you a one-stop sort of a view on what were the changes introduced by the 2003 Electricity Act. Right. In addition to that, in addition to generation, states were also given the option to bring in private participation in distribution and transmission. If you'll all recollect, I made the distinction between transmission and distribution. Transmission is from the point of generation till the jurisdiction of any particular distribution licensee like BESCOM, MESCOM, any of those. But once it comes there, it goes into the distribution network to be supplied to the end consumers. So what I mean when I say states were given this option is, please remember that the subject of electricity is in the concurrent list in the Constitution, list 3, which means that both center and state have the power to legislate. Where there is a conflict, the central legislation will prevail. That's the first principle of the lists, list 3. So this is an example of cooperative federalism, so to speak, because some things have still been left to the state to regulate, even though strictly speaking, if the center wished to regulate all of this, it could do so as well. So some states have private distribution licensees. For example, in Bombay, you can pay your bill to either Reliance or the Tatas, and in Delhi also you have Reliance and Tata, which play the role of distribution licensees. But Karnataka so far has not allowed privatization of distribution or transmission. Some states are also looking to privatize transmission. Adani is coming up and setting up a transmission licensee in some areas. But Karnataka is not one of those states. What was also introduced in addition to all of this, and then this is the last primary highlight of the 2003 scheme, was renewable purchase obligations. Now, what this simply means is each distribution licensee, so let's say BESCOM, MESCOM, CESC, any of them, were obligated to purchase at least 10% of their energy requirement from renewable sources. So this was done to promote generation of renewable sources. So solar, wind, and mini hydel and technologies like that. Okay. So now let's just sort of, now that we have a basic understanding of how all of this works, at this point I would like to stop and see if there are any questions before we sort of go into the tariff structure and the economics of that. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Hello, sir. My name is Bindu George. I happen to be in the second year of LLB. I'm particularly interested in the topic that you are doing today because my dad is a retired electricity board engineer from KPTCL. Okay. So I would like to know, I mean, what were the acts before these, before the inception of this act? Did we have any? Yeah. So if you look at this, if you see, these were the 3 acts that were in place. Okay. The Electricity Act of 1910, the Supply Act of 1948, and the Regulatory Commissions Act of 1998. Okay, so everything was in place before even the board
Yes, yes. Everything was in place except for the fact that, except for these features, which are all features of the 2003 Act. So it was not privatized,
Open
right?
access.
Yeah, open access, delicensing of generation. You had a captive generation. All of this, see, because you couldn't have captive generation if private people weren't allowed to generate, right? If only the state was allowed to generate, the state would have to sell it to its consumers. But if you have private generators, let's say I have a company and I set up a power plant exclusively for my own use, I can do that today. And in fact, the power I get from that plant will be cheaper than the power I can get from Bescom. And in addition to that, I'll have 100% uptime. Right. So this has become a very, this has become the go-to route for a lot of big industry to set up captive generating plants, right? And we never had power trading and all that because again there was no question of there being a surplus. We were always facing shortages. So today there's actually a surplus, so it allows for all of this. You can buy power like you can buy power like you buy stock at the stock market. You can buy it at short-term rates and from different from wherever that entity may be located in the country, really, right? So these were the major differences between the pre-2003 position and the post-2003 position. Does that sum it up? Does that answer your question?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering my question.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Villu. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, sometimes we have this grid failure happening and grid failure happening. Are there any regulatory mechanisms to address such?
Yeah, so we will. Yeah, that's a good question, Pankaj. We'll come to that. See, the safety of the grid again. So let's start with what is the grid, right? The grid is basically wherever generation is happening in the state of Karnataka or even outside the state of Karnataka, and that power is being injected into what we notionally call the grid, right? That power is being injected at specific points. And then, like I said, it's not a commodity that can be stored. So then it is routed to specific customers, right? So grid security is a very important thing. And within the state, the KERC, the Electricity Regulatory Commission, has ample regulations in force. There is something called the grid code, which is to be complied with. And before, like, let's say I generate, and before I pump that energy into the grid, I have to give prior information that I'm doing this, right? So that it allows for what they call scheduling and forecasting. So at any point in time, there is a system in place which is measuring what is the quantum of electricity that is flowing into the grid and what the grid is able to handle and where it is ultimately being supplied to. Right? So all of those grid code and all of that is in place, and scheduling and forecasting and all of that, it works fairly well most of the time. But yes, sometimes there are points where there might be some kind of a lapse or a failure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, my question is, do you have regulatory, like who?
Yes, there is a grid code. There is a grid code that is notified by the Karnataka Electricity Regulatory Commission for intrastate transmission of electricity. There is also a central grid, so under KPTCL, which is the Power Transmission Corporation Limited in Karnataka, there is something called the State Load Dispatch Center. Now, this entity is responsible for managing the load of the grid at any given point in time. And similarly, at the national level, there is something called a Regional Load Dispatch Center, which would be for a particular region. For example, Southeast India or something like that. And then on a national level. So all of this it's a very highly regulated industry. There are regulations and codes for all of this. So the grid code exists at an India level and at a state level. To answer your question. Okay. Anybody else has any questions before we move on? Okay, feel free to use the raise your hand option and interrupt me with a question if it comes up. I will now move on to the tariff structure, because this sort of plays a role in the economics of the entire thing, and it will give you a sense for how this industry functions. You know, how different entities make money, what are their roles and functions, and where do we figure in all of this, the end consumers, right? Now, so tariff structure, whenever we discuss tariff structure in this industry, we have to look at two separate sides. One is the side of the generators, and the other is the side of the consumers. So on the generator side, there are two ways in which a tariff is determined. One is a determination process that happens under Section 62 of the Act, where, let's say I want to set up a power plant. I go and file a petition before the KERC for tariff fixation. I specify all my costs, my expenses, my financing, you know, whether I've raised money through equity, whether I've raised financing through loans, what is the quantum of power I'm supplying, what is the technology involved, which, you know, they go into very minute details, like what will be the efficacy of this technology for the first 5 years, next 5 years, the 5 years after that, and what are the terms of the PPAs, to sort of figure out a tariff which is fair to everyone, you know, so that it provides enough incentive for private generators to come and set up these projects, because they're assured of a reasonable return on their investment. It also makes sure that the consumers who end up paying the ultimate tariff are not paying excessively high tariffs, right? So it's very well regulated in that sense. So Section 62, where I as a generator go and file a petition for computation of tariff, is one method. The other method is competitive bidding, which is like tenders, right? I'm sure at some point you all might have come across articles in newspapers saying solar energy is now 2 rupees a unit, wind is 2.5 rupees a unit, and it's the lowest we've achieved in such a long time, and all of that. So all of that happens through competitive bidding, which is covered under Section 63 of the Act. Now that system is very much like a tender. We have CREDL, which is a Karnataka Renewable Energy Development Limited in Karnataka, which is a nodal agency of the government of Karnataka, which will invite bids for supply of electricity through renewable means, either solar, wind, any other source of renewable energy, and say what is the lowest tariff that you will give us, and if your tariff is the lowest, we'll give you permission and land and all of that to set up your respective projects. Now the difference is between 62 and 63. 62 is a determination process where I come and say, these are all my costs, so you please determine the tariff for me. 63 is where I say, I am making a bid to supply X megawatt or X quantity of electricity at a per unit tariff of Y. It can be anything. And the only option with the state is either to take it or leave it. There is no negotiation for tariff determination under 63. The entity which has issued the bid, which more often than not in Karnataka is CREDL, will have to either accept it or leave it, right? So that's something that you have to keep in mind from the generator side. In respect of tariff from the consumer side, interestingly, you will be sort of, it's just a random bit of trivia, but the present tariff structure that we have was actually designed by Dr. Ambedkar. And we still follow that system today, and it's a system of cross-subsidization. Now, what does that mean? It means there are different classes of consumers, and one class cross-subsidizes the cost of supply to the other classes of consumers. Now, the way that and all of this is under regulations called the conditions of supply. Each distribution licensee will have its own conditions of supply, BESCOM, CESC, MESCOM, etc. And the conditions of supply will have different classifications for consumers. So you have EHT, which is extra high tension, all of that, right? You have LT, low tension. So a very simple way to remember this is to know that big industry, which is EHT, they have the highest tariff if they decide to avail power from the ESCOMs and not go the captive generation or purchase from third-party route. And if they decide to, for whatever reason, purchase power from the state distribution entities, they'll have to pay the highest tariff. And they subsidize everyone across the board. So even those of us, regardless of our backgrounds, who live in houses, big houses, and run big offices, small offices, all of that, we don't pay the full cost of the supply of electricity to our homes and offices, because we come under a class which is subsidized by big industry. And accordingly, there are classes below us which pay even lesser or sometimes none at all, right? Going till agricultural sector. So that's how this system works. And I'll tell you where this makes a difference. It makes a difference in the financial health of distribution licensees who do not have enough customers or consumers, who opt for EHTs or if they don't have enough big industries in their region, then they face some kind of financial issues, because let's assume they supply to whoever's in their region, which they have a obligation and a duty to do. They can't deny service to anyone who opts for an electricity connection. And even if they recover 100% of the electricity dues from the respective consumers, they will still not be able to sort of be sustainable by themselves commercially, and they won't even have a small profit even, right? So that becomes a problem, and that is where we see, even though we have excess generation, distribution is still a little bit of an issue, because if there are not enough paying customers in a particular area, then distribution there typically suffers. Distribution does exist, but if it comes to sort of cutting electricity or power or something like that, then those areas typically get the short end of the stick, right? Now, the way that the tariff is at least structured is with the intention to progressively reduce cross subsidization, to make sure that everyone sort of pays what they're supposed to pay for the electricity they're consuming. But of course, this is a very political issue, and at some point we also have to take into consideration that electricity is a public good. It's an essential commodity. You can't do without electricity these days, either for lights or for heat or for anything really. So you have to make sure that it's a service that's available to everyone, regardless of their economic or financial background. Okay, so we've covered this. So before we move on, any questions so far on the tariff structures?
Babu,
Yes.
I'm facing one of my clients. My clients are residents of Shriram Goldfields,
Right.
Greenfields. What is the issue there is? The builder has got this ST connection or what, like the connection which we obtain for construction purpose.
Right, temporary connection.
Temporary connections.
Right.
So what the builder has done, he has installed some Y app or something called some other private meters.
Okay.
And he's been charging 7 rupees per unit, but
Right.
Bescom rates are like 3.5 rupees per unit.
Right.
In Bangalore. So we have filed one representation before Bescom, asking them to give them permanent connection and install Bescom meters.
Right.
Do Bescom have authority to provide meters when the building has not obtained completion certificate?
So see, this is a very recent issue that's cropped up in Karnataka generally, because what used to happen was all of this turns on the definition of consumer and premises in the Electricity Act. So if you look at the definition of premises, it is very broad. Let's say, and you might have gone to some local market and seen a very, very small shop, not even 5 by 10 or anything like that, a temporary arrangement really, but they'll have a light bulb on top, and that light bulb is functioning as a result of electricity coming in from somewhere, right? So even such small temporary structures classify as premises and are entitled to electricity. Now that was the position before Bescom in consultation with other government agencies, especially BBMP and all of them, came and said, look, a lot of illegal structures are getting permanent electricity connections, and we don't want that happening. So they issued a notification saying only if you have obtained the occupancy certificate will you be entitled to a permanent power connection by BESCOM. Right? So as on date, you can't get permanent electricity connection by BESCOM unless you have an occupancy certificate. So, I mean,
one more issue I would like to discuss. What has happened and the builder had to install something called power station there. They had to install some power station, and the builders took an extension for 1 more year to install a power station and other things.
Right.
And there is some power fluctuations always happening there. And now some Karnataka State Pollution Control Board have found some irregularities with regard to some other STP and stormwater drain and other things. They have recommended to disconnect all the power supplies and to also confiscate all the DG power supplies, backup generators.
Right.
Now residents who purchased apartments from which are facing the issue.
Right.
And it's not coming forward to resolve that issue. Because they had to spend almost 20 crores of rupees to install a power station there.
Right.
They are not coming, but occupancy certificate has been issued by Mandur Gram Panchayat.
Right, may not be the competent authority.
Yes, the Gram Panchayat is not a competent authority to issue occupancy certificate.
Yeah.
So this has come up, but we have made a representation that you cannot cut short our power supply and our DG supply, because you should direct before approaching us, you have to approach the builder first.
Right. I think there are 2-3 issues here, right? And let's first start with this occupancy certificate that's obtained from the Gram Panchayat. All of that the builders actually started doing because of RERA. Because the application of RERA ceases when you obtain an occupancy certificate, right? So that means the building is deemed to be completed and RERA no longer will have any application. So because that's not something that's recognized by BESCOM, they don't issue permanent power connection. What the builders have started doing in their agreements with their customers is they've started saying that, as long as you are getting electricity, whether I supply it through private means or through BESCOM, you can't question that. And you'll have to pay the tariff that we've agreed to. And that will be split amongst all the units in the building, right? Now, these are all...
BESCOM has given all permanent meters to all 2,300 apartments.
No, see that, I'll have to look into the specific facts of the case. So if BESCOM has given a permanent connection, and before that is disconnected, there is procedure set down under the Act to say that, look, you have to issue a notice, there has to be hearing, all of that.
Okay.
Before there's any disconnection. Once it is issued, because once it is issued, you have a right. It is not easy to just have it disconnected like that, especially in such a big apartment where so many people are staying, right? But at the end of the day, who is the consumer, right? Insofar as each apartment is concerned, each person there is a consumer of BESCOM. But insofar as connection to the premises is concerned as a whole, the apartment owners association or the builder, depending on whether the transfer has taken place between those two legal entities, will have to be responsible for compliances. Now, this sounds more like a consumer forum issue, really, because you'll have to show deficiency of service and go to the consumer forum, and maybe depending on the facts and circumstances of the case, you may even have a case before RERA or a civil court for that matter.
Okay. My question is, can we bring a stay during such proceedings when we residents have filed against the builder?
See, you can.
Non-compliance.
Yeah, but see, stay on what, right? If it's stay on something that the Pollution Control Board is doing, I don't know if that's something that's that the court will be inclined to look into, because at the end of the day, the Pollution Control Board also has to do its job. So if there are, just because it inconvenienced the residents of a building, who strictly speaking had an obligation to conduct their own diligence before making the purchase, to see whether the builder is compliant with all the laws and everything is in order, right? If that has not happened for whatever reason, and they've gone ahead and purchased it, they would not have such a strong case. I mean, I don't know, depending on the facts and circumstances, they might have some kind of a case, but we haven't seen encouraging results in such situations from the courts, especially if the statutory bodies are doing their duties in accordance with the act and the rules. Everyone, any questions on the tariff discussion that we've had, either on the generator side or on the consumer side?
Shodhan, one more question.
Yeah.
Are there separate authorities who can install separate electricity meters? Like BESCOM will issue a meter, okay, it will run on their lines. Can a private entity install a meter and ask for different pricings?
No. So see, that's a good question actually. The meter installation at the end of the day, regardless of where you get your electricity from, whether you get it from a private generator or not, it is all routed through BESCOM. If you're located in Bangalore, it is all routed through BESCOM.
Absolutely, I agree with you. But here, taking up a private connection and further like subdividing it for 450 residents in Shriram Greenfields,
Right.
by installing a separate meter not given by BESCOM. They have made such a kind of arrangement there. And after making that arrangement, they are charging a higher tariff structure, which is higher than BESCOM rates.
Right. See, in a private arrangement, you can agree to whatever rates you want. It can either be higher, it can either be lower. Now, the only reason it will be higher is because you're not eligible for a BESCOM connection. So I don't know what the contractual arrangement there is. If the contractual arrangement says, yes, you will be paying a higher tariff until we obtain a permanent BESCOM connection, and people have agreed to that, then they'll have to bear the cost of that higher tariff. If they've not agreed to it, then it's a different thing altogether. Now, on the question of meters, I'm actually not sure. It's the first time I've heard of a private entity being able to put in their own meter.
They have asked all residents to install something called Y app. It's an application. On that application, the tariff is generated based on their meter readings.
Right. So that's not exactly a physical meter. Then it's some kind of a computer application. But I don't know if that's allowed. It's really the first time I'm hearing of something like this. So
because in my understanding, what I will like to say is, maybe the builder has not obtained OC and has still got a private connection, and he has sold the apartments to all the buyers. Now he has to give them electricity, and he has not, because he has not obtained OC, they are not giving permanent connections. So he is giving them connections based on the ST connection readings, and it is divided for all residents.
Yeah,
that arrangement may be there. I think
so. Maybe there, yeah, maybe. Okay. Everyone, any other questions on tariff structure, or can we move on?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay. So now at the end of this, we'll come to functions of the regulators, and this is sort of important to understand, because everything is regulated by these entities. So you have sorry, just give me 1 second. Yeah, so you have state electricity regulatory commissions that were set up under section 82 of the Act. Each state will have its own regulatory commission, and there may be joint regulatory commissions for union territories. There is a central electricity regulatory commission, which will be set up under section 79 of the Act. There's an appellate tribunal for electricity to hear appeals from the state regulatory commissions and the central electricity regulatory commission. And appeals from APTEL will go to the Supreme Court. So the high courts are completely sort of shut out of this hierarchy. Of course, high courts will have powers under 226 and 227 to the general power of superintendents. If any of these tribunals act contrary to their jurisdiction or contrary to principles of natural justice, then the high courts can and have been known to interfere. But these are primarily the three entities that are set, the regulatory entities that are set up under the Electricity Act. Each state will have its own regulatory commission. The Central Electricity Regulatory Commission we'll get into that a little bit, because I don't think I've touched upon the need for such a body. So if we go back here, when we look at open access and wheeling and vacuum of electricity plus intrastate transmission and interstate transmission, just like how Karnataka has KPTCL, the Karnataka Power Transmission Corporation Limited, which looks at transmission of electricity within state borders, there is something called an ISTS network. That's the Interstate Transmission System Network. That interstate transmission system network is managed by a central transmission utility called PGCIL, the Power Grid Corporation of India Limited. So Power Grid Corporation of India Limited manages the interstate transmission system wherever it is in India. Right. So let's say you want to send some electricity from Karnataka to Kashmir or anywhere else, you would use the interstate transmission system to do that. And the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission is basically responsible for the interstate transmission system, regulating the interstate transmission system and regulating interstate sale of electricity. And everything within a state comes under the jurisdiction of the State Electricity Regulatory Commission. The moment it becomes interstate, if two states are involved or if sometimes more than two states are involved, then that will immediately go to the CERC. Right? In case of any dispute between the generators, the licensees, the traders, or anybody else who are governed by these regulations. Now, these are the functions of the regulators. Section 79 specifies the functions of the CERC, and they're as follows. So, regulating generating companies owned or controlled by the central government, regulating tariff for interstate sale or transmission of electricity. So similarly, how the SERCs regulate tariff for intrastate procurement and sale, the central ones regulated for interstate sale. To issue licenses for transmission licensees and traders for interstate operations. Like I told you, Adani is looking to set up a transmission undertaking. So licensing and sort of regulatory compliance with all of that will be monitored by the CERC. And they are also vested with adjudicatory powers upon disputes involving generating companies or transmission licensees engaged in interstate activity. And now again, we come to the grid code. There was a good question raised about whether there are regulations for grid codes. The central grid code is something that's the domain of the CERC. There is something called the Central Electricity Authority, which looks at the technical part of it and specifies what are the standard of equipment and quality and reliability tests that they need to meet to be able to be used as part of all of this transmission and distribution network. And the CERC looks at issues of connectivity to the interstate transmission system from point of generation. And it also looks to specify and enforce quality standards for services by licensees. And so these are the functions of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, which is located in Delhi. Now, functions of the SERCs are slightly wider than the functions of the CERC. So SERCs are tasked with determination of tariff for generation, supply, transmission and wheeling of electricity within the state. So when we say wheeling, and in the beginning I briefly touched upon it and said this is very similar to toll charges. Right? If you use the highway, you pay toll. You use the transmission and distribution system, you pay what are called open access charges or wheeling charges. Now this is determined by the KERC in Karnataka under Section 42 of the Electricity Act. So all of this ultimately goes into the tariff calculation, the tariff that is paid to the generator. All of this becomes a cost as part of that tariff for the purpose of accounting for it. And once that is supplied to the distribution licensee for that price, for example, for the sake of argument, let's say 3 rupees a unit, and there is something called the averaged pooled power cost. which basically means I will have power coming in from 5 or 6 different kinds of technologies: wind, solar, hydro, which is the mainstay of the Karnataka load requirement. Most of it comes from hydro. About now, because we've done very well over the past few years in promoting renewable energy, about close to about 20% of Karnataka's requirement comes from renewable sources. But there'll be different tariffs for all of this. So there will be an average pool power cost, which is, if you average all of it out, what is the per unit cost that BESCOM or any of the ESCOMs are paying the generators. Based on that, you add your distribution costs for maintaining the distribution network in the system and all of that. And then we come to the cross-subsidized model that we discussed, right? So the EHTs and the big industries subsidize everybody else down the value chain. So that's how the tariff system works from the perspective of generation and consumers. And these are the considerations that the KERC will look into. Open access wheeling charges, we just discussed that. The electricity purchase and procurement process of distribution licensees, including price of purchase, right? So recently, because renewable energy sector, especially wind and solar, we've seen record low prices through the competitive bidding process. The KERC actually has a notification that says that you can only acquire renewable energy through competitive bidding process. So it is no longer feasible for a renewable energy generator to come before the KERC, file a petition for tariff determination and say, you determine some kind of a tariff for me, because the KERC has simply said, we will not do that for renewable energy generators, because the tariff that we will get from bidding processes is much lower than what we would have to pay if we went through an individual tariff determination process, right? So they have extensive control over how the procurement happens as well. Now, the SERCs also have to facilitate intra-state transmission and wheeling of electricity, basically to make sure that KPTCL does its job and maintain a robust network, which is able to transmit electricity from wherever it is generated. So these are done through what are called substations. So depending on a cluster of generators, there are substations set up there by KPTCL to receive power from there and put it onto that transmission system that they have, which ultimately for distribution. And SERCs will also issue licenses for traders, transmission licenses, distribution licenses within the state of Karnataka. Now, like I've said, transmission licenses and distribution licenses in Karnataka are still state entities. They're not privatized. So as of now, until and unless private participation is allowed in those areas, the existing licenses are the only options for the consumers. So for example, in Delhi and Bombay, if you're living in any one particular area, you can choose which distribution license you will take electricity from and pay them accordingly. So there is some competition there. But in Karnataka, you can only, if you're in Bangalore, you can only go with BESCOM, for example, right? They also have to promote renewable energy generation. So they have an obligation to promote renewable energy generation. It's a statutory obligation. And thereby they impose something called the RPO obligations, which we discussed in the beginning and said that each entity will have to source 10% from renewable energy sources. Then there's the usual of specifying the grid code, enforcing standards of quality, trading margin, and most importantly, adjudicating disputes between generators and licensees, which is where we sort of come in, the litigators who practice in this area. Right? So
one small question, Shodhan.
Yeah.
Is there a bar for private players to enter in Karnataka?
For distribution and transmission, yes. You cannot be. Karnataka doesn't issue licenses for distribution and transmission.
In Maharashtra, there is entry of private players.
Yes. Maharashtra, Delhi, there is entry of private players, but not in Karnataka.
Is it a bar from the state government or some rules?
So what happened, like I said, before the 2003 Act, all of this was with the state government, generation, distribution, transmission, everything. Now the 2003 Act privatized delicensed generation compulsorily across the country. So no state could say, I will not permit private generation anymore. But they were still given the option to either keep their existing state entities for distribution and transmission or privatize that as well. So some states have gone the privatization route. Most states have not. Karnataka has not gone through that route.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, so I think that sort of covers it. I just want to touch very briefly on this concept that we have mentioned here as part of open access, which is wheeling and banking. And because we see a lot of disputes in this particular area in the present moment, I'm personally handling about 4-5 of them. And this is something that's unique to the renewable energy space. Right? We've seen a lot of push towards renewable over the past 10-15 years. And this sort of gives you an idea of the role that technology plays, right? So like we come back to the foundational principle that electricity is not a commodity that you can store. Once you generate it, you have to supply it somewhere, right? And like you all must realize, we've had a long history of having solar water heaters on our roofs, and they don't always work very well, right? Because solar works only when the sun is out. So optimal generation time period within a day for solar would be about, maybe depending on the region, 9:30 to 11 in the morning till about 4-5 in the evening. Right? That's when optimum generation would take place. But that's not a time for peak demand. Peak demand usually is in the mornings or in the night, right? So, and same with wind. You don't control when the wind blows, the pace of the wind. Yes, you can do wind feasibility studies, and there's technology to sort of predict it within a margin, but you still have to play within that margin. So you don't generate the quantum or the timing of electricity when you are generating through renewable sources, which is why they are called non-conventional sources of energy. So for example, a dam, a hydroelectric dam, you can switch it off if you don't want it to be generating. And you can switch it on whenever you want it to generate, and it will generate. But that's not the case with renewable energy, right? But again, renewable energy is considered to be clean and environmentally sustainable and all that. There are different arguments for that, but you can go with what the popular perception is right now. So they've introduced this concept of banking. So what that essentially means is, let's say I set up a solar power plant and I generate electricity through the day and for the month and all that. And I generate in the middle of the day because that's when the sun is out. And I supply it to the grid and it is recorded. So let's say I supply 100 units to the grid, that 100 units is recorded. And I can use that for any time. There is some kind of a calculation mechanism to sort of say, for example, if I want to use it in the morning, I might have to account for 90 units because those 10 units is lost as a result of that not being the peak time. Right? So there is some cost associated with it. So that is called banking, that you don't have to use it as soon as it is generated. Somebody will use it, in the sense that if I send it to the grid, Bescom will use that quantum of electricity to supply to somebody. We don't know who it is in reality, but somebody would have had access to that electricity. But if I as a generator have a direct power purchase agreement with, let's say, a mall in Bangalore, that mall will be given the credit of that quantum of electricity I've supplied to Bescom or to the grid, right? So that system is called banking. It's something where you have some kind of a credit system where you've deposited something at a particular point in time and you can withdraw it at a later point in time. So this causes a lot of issues, especially for the distribution licensees, because then they have to adjust for there being electricity when there may not be sufficient need for it. But they'll have to still provide that electricity in the peak period. And even though there is, for the purposes of an overall calculation, there's more electricity than required, but it's not coming at the right time of the day, right? Which is why they might need to still procure power to be used at a specific time of day when renewable energy generation is not feasible. So this is presently the biggest challenge the entire world faces, to shifting to 100% renewables. Until we figure out a solution to this problem, there is no shifting to 100% renewables, right? You have to have either nuclear or hydroelectric or any stable option where you can turn it on, turn it off whenever as per your requirement, or until batteries become cheaper, in which case you can store this electricity that you have generated during the day and when the wind blows and all of that, and you can use it at a subsequent period in time. I mean, the only technology we have for that is lithium-ion batteries, which are the same batteries that we have in our cell phones and everything, and which presently it's not feasible to do that at that scale. Though we've seen very nascent developments where we are seeing hybrid solar and wind plants where it comes with battery backup, and we're definitely getting there in terms of technology, but so far it's not feasible to be done on a large scale yet. Anyway, that sort of ends my presentation for the day. I've taken 1 hour exactly. I'm glad to see that. Any questions at the end? Either on, now we're at the end, so any question on anything really? Structure hierarchy of the regulators, tariff, pre-2003 position, post-2003 position. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, anyone has a question?
My question is it the same with regard to nuclear power generation also, because it's compulsorily only central
That's
government?
a very good question, Pankaj. So let me I should have put that in the presentation, and thank you for asking that question. So for nuclear energy, there's a separate act altogether. It's called the Atomic Energy Act. That is not governed by the Electricity Act at all. And there is no private participation for nuclear power reactors in India. It's all done by the central government. So that is entirely different. That is not governed by this act at all. And nothing that I've said so far applies to atomic energy. None of these regulatory commissions have jurisdiction over that. None of these regulations that we have here would apply to that. All that is completely governed by the Atomic Energy Act.
So if anyone has grievances against nuclear energy, try to.
So if anyone has grievances against nuclear energy, it's really a tough fight for them. We've seen what has happened in Tamil Nadu, and they're trying to set up the plant, I think, at Kundakulam. So that runs into a lot of issues, because once central government has taken a stand that this is in the public interest, it will have to be a political decision to stop that, right? Unless and until there are violations of the Atomic Energy Act or anything like that. Just the mere apprehension of danger, or just the mere apprehension of me feeling unsafe because there's a nuclear power plant close by, that's unfortunately not a sufficient ground to sort of go anywhere, especially to judicial forums, and seek some kind of order preventing those power plants from being set up, right? And let me just say, as someone who's been doing electricity law for the past so many years, I've been doing it for 10 years now. And I've had a fair bit of opportunities to sort of look into the different technologies and what is most feasible, right? Yes, the catastrophes of nuclear reactors and energy stations gone wrong are unimaginable, right? I don't need to tell you all of that. You've seen Chernobyl and what has happened there, and even in Bhopal we had the gas tragedy, and it would be similar. Gas is not power, but it would be similar in terms of danger to the public at large. But just in terms of which is the most environmentally sustainable method of power generation, it would have to be nuclear power, in my opinion, simply because, look, you need 120 acres of land to set up a 20 megawatt solar power plant. And windmills are also, you need large tracts of land. And lately what we're noticing is that this also has a lot of environmental repercussions. For example, wherever there are solar panels set up over 120 acres of land, the nature of the land is changing. Some animals and part of the ecosystem that were part of it are not able to be there anymore. And the windmills change wind patterns and are really a problem for a lot of birds And so wind and even wind and solar, for all of their, they're definitely cleaner than energy that you would get from, let's say, coal or anything like that. But they have their issues. So if you look at any, if you look at even, so if you have a nuclear power reactor or 120 acres, for example, it could serve the energy needs of the entire state, right? And yes, and I keep coming back to this, if it goes wrong, it really does go wrong. But if we look at the sort of, we get horrified by the extent to which it goes wrong. But if we look at it in terms of absolute numbers, the number of nuclear related disasters and the count of people who've been affected by them, there are some very, very credible people who've done research into this, making the argument that nuclear energy is not as dangerous as it's made out to be. But I fully understand that when it goes wrong, it really does go wrong.
Thank you, sir.
Does anybody else have any questions? So should we give it a few minutes, or should we wrap it up?
Yeah, one question, like, is the cost list prepared daily? Like, I mean, like, how does the KERC perform? Like, every day, I mean, we have a cost list. Or...
So KERC before lockdown used to function only on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 p.m. onwards. But now, because of the existing pendency, they're sitting fairly regularly. So you can check the KERC website, the cost list will be out. And now hearings are happening through video conferencing. So, I mean, they do this thing where they send us links. So I don't know if the link is publicly available, but they have a cost list out almost every day now. So if you're interested in knowing the practical side of it, I can maybe spend some 5 minutes and tell you what are the kind of disputes and what are the kind of clients we'll be representing in this area. If that is something that would be of interest.
Please go ahead, Sean.
Okay. So see here, if you're practicing on if you're doing litigation, there are 3 branches to this, like in most areas of the law. There's advisory, there's litigation, and there's transactions. If you're doing, and this is a very, very sort of niche area of the law. So there are not more than maybe at best there are about 70 of us who do electricity law litigation throughout the country, right? And it's a really technical area, and there aren't too many lawyers doing this. So there's plenty of opportunity for new people who want to sort of explore this. So private side, you will mostly be representing generators. There might be tariff determination issues. There might be open access related issues. A lot of it is administrative law at its foundation. Principles of natural justice, delegated legislation, all of that in terms of actual practice. You will be before the High Courts. You will be before the Electricity Regulatory Commissions, APTEL, CERC, and Supreme Court. So that way you get to see a wide variety of forums where you can sort of practice this in. In terms of transactions, there is a lot of scope because they're all big, very big infrastructure projects where the bigger generating companies are spending in the thousands of crores to set up their power plants. So it requires a lot of financing, whether that's done through equity or through loans or grants and all of that. So project financing is a big part of this practice. The negotiation for PPAs, the negotiation for wheeling and banking agreements, for trading licenses, for trading agreements, are all gives a lot of opportunities to lawyers to sort of be very proactively engaged in this space, especially because there's so few of us who fully understand it in detail and who spent like years sort of practicing this relatively obscure area of the law, right? So that you will be representing primarily big and small generators. In fact, there are in Karnataka, there are farmers in the northern part of Karnataka who have a lot of sugarcane based farming. They set up everything from bagasse based plants to rooftop solar at a small level to ground mounted solar and wind power plants ranging from 1 megawatt all the way to about 150 200 megawatts. Right. So, and you have companies which do exclusively rooftop solar now. They set up rooftop solar on metro stations, on the Bangalore airport. If you've been in the Bangalore airport, you will see that they widely advertise that they're sourcing a certain percentage of the requirements from their own solar energy farms, which is on the roofs and ground mounted as well. So there is plenty of opportunity in this space, because it's an essential industry. It's not something that's really affected by the lockdown and all of that. Everybody needs power, and these entities need to function. So it's when you're practicing, it's always good to have a couple of resilient industries like this in your portfolio, right? Pharma, power, infrastructure. It sort of balances out the work that you steadily get, especially in times like this when there's a lot of contraction in industrial activity. Right, so that's really the range of work that we do. I primarily do litigation in this space. We don't do much of transactions in this space at all, because now continuing trend that we have seen is most of these companies are big enough to sort of completely do their own transactions. They don't give it out to any law firm. They do it in-house. They go to law firms, they hire entire teams from law firms to do their transactions and do it in-house. It's very rare that at least the bigger ones give it outside. So there's plenty of opportunities in-house positions in these companies as well. And I must tell you, the work is excellent. For in-house positions, the amount of litigation they handle, the amount of transactions they handle, the amount of advisory they will need from lawyers is really going up day by day. There's plenty of opportunity here as well. So yeah, that's the practice side of things. Happy to take questions on that as well if anyone has questions. Okay, then I think we can wrap it up. Thank you all for being a patient and wonderful audience. It's a pleasure to speak to you all, and I must tell you the quality of questions were great. Thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Shodhan, for enriching us with the Electricity Act and the area of practice into electricity, which many of us, it's a blind spot, I will say, in the legal field. Many of us don't know that this field exists at all. So it's very interesting to know how disputes of different types arises in the electricity tribunals and other places. And we would like to welcome you again for several other seminars in future. So,
sure, glad to.
Sure, I will call you. I'll give you a call. We'll discuss for a seminar next month also. Yeah.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
day.
you.